It happened that after the encounter and suddenly appeared clear desire to understand my soul, I fell in love with my therapist. Surprise! But there were some obstacles. Some parts of me were against this feeling and loudly demonstrated it through my behavior, mood, and psychosomatic illnesses. It was a great chance to discover my deep self. And that time, I learned about Dr. Dorothy Liu's research on the explanation for serial killers' behavior. You didn't expect it, did you? So, there were two interesting things about this research. First, Dr. Lius found out that actually the combination of three elements, brain dysfunction, child abuse, and psychotic behavior, can present a person with high possibility to become a murderer. And second thing, Dr. Lewis was working with cases of dissociative identity disorder. It's when a person has more than two personalities in him. And I thought that actually this disorder somehow in its structure was similar to Eric Berne transactional analysis, or to the Karpman triangle, or to Jung archetypes, or even to Freud psyche division. Let me explain what I mean. Eric Berne suggested that we communicate with each other from one out of three possible positions, or ego states. You know them: adult, child, or parent. Moreover, we have a certain scenario that we form in our childhood, filling each ego state with certain content. Stephen Karpman proposed yet another, but still a model of human interaction, though a destructive one, but again with three possible actors: victim, prosecutor, or rescuer. But you have only one scenario here. You can play running around the same circle again and again and again, or you just don't play, but you have to restructure yourself. So in these models, there are roles that you can play because actually you have all the roles in you. When we're talking about Jung and his archetypes, it seems that it's more about a person in your life and his path. However, this person interacts with the world and with other people, and actually those people can play a specific role in the archetype scenario, or even be an archetype. For example, if we're talking about my path as a hero, when I left my parents' house and went to study to Moscow, I started my so-called individuation. To say it simple, my path of becoming mature adult. On this journey, I met my professor who taught me a lot. For instance, the system analysis. And actually, he played a role of the wizard, not wizard, wise, of the wise old man. like, Dumbledore for Harry Potter. And you know what's funny? I already had these parts in me, though I didn't listen to it. And in fact, it was her, and in fact, not so old. But who cares? The thing is that actually this part had the same function. I mean, giving you really hard tasks and not explaining everything. So in Jung model, we also have parts to interact with inner and external world. If we're talking about Freud, his model, let's say, rather abstract. We have it, the dark part that contains instincts, pleasure, cruelty. We have ego, our common sense that rule all our inner chaos, and we have superego. You know that perfect perfection, the moral of the morals that we get from our external world, mostly from our parents. Yet, and still, there are parts to interact with the external and inner world, and they play their roles. So the difference is only in the content of these parts. While watching the doc film about Dr. Liu's studies, I noticed that all of her clients had the same yet so different parts to interact with the inner and external world. Of course, one of their parts that harmed other people was like a radical display on the whole scale of, let's say, a person's self-representation in this world. Really radical. Still, what I noticed more that like Berne, Karpman, Jung, or Freud parts, the killer's parts had a specific trigger after which they activated. What's more, this trigger was somehow connected with the killer child abuse history. And to me, that looked like a defense mechanism. And I know that sounds crazy and strange to think that killing a person can be a defense, but in their coordinate system, they might actually protect themselves from the same scenario from their childhood. They repeat again and again. So I figured out two patterns. The first one, each person has different parts, and actually they are quite stable and filled with certain content and scenarios to interact with the inner and external worlds. And second, there must be some kind of trigger to activate this or that part. And I have me with different parts, some of which were against my feeling. That was hard part to tell you. By that time, I already knew that the diversity of my inner parts could be compared with Netflix mainstream policy. Kidding, I am far from Netflix. But the fact was that I couldn't fully fit myself into any of the models I've described to you earlier. To illustrate it, once I felt three inner children of different ages and sex with different functions, and my therapist was like, "What?" Okay. I couldn't blame for this reaction. That was one thing, but there was another. You see, all the models were created under the influence of their periods. I mean the historical context. For Freud and Jung, the main question of that time was balancing between instincts and morals. And while Freud was more about what's wrong or right review and disclosed some censored topics like sex, Jung was looking for deep answers in the deepest parts of human past that had already proved themselves, like myths and fairy tales. And he was also trying to see the same forms, patterns in the modern human behavior. Berne suggested his model when it was more common to discuss family issues and child development and behavior, and not from a position of dogmas. That was possible thanks to some researchers who, unlike Freud, considered children as humans. Okay, well, maybe I'm too preconceived about him, but maybe not. What I can add for sure is that that period of time, the focus of the people started to move from the social group conflicts and differences to a single person life. What I mean is that the humanity past the times of surviving, well, a part of humanity, the times of empires, kings and queens, though they are just examples of a system, and of course the revolutions. And now was facing the standing up capitalism, the coming up food prosperity, and of course the raising anxiety about the meaning of a life and other stuff. The same goes for Karpman, but here I will add the whole Cold War situation and the USSR and the USA competition for the Third World. And of course, the increasing accessibility for information. Mm, so, all the models actually were working just fine, but I thought that there could be room for improvement. Why not try to create something that could include everything, especially when we are facing now such a gigantic globalization in every sphere. To be more specific, now we meet more people than ever, and our essential relationships can be not with just our parents or connected with one country or one nation. We can actually build them with anybody from anywhere. And it's so fantastic, isn't it? To be honest, it's something that concerned me. You see, my whole life is a constant change of countries, cultures, people. And though my parents are Russian, I couldn't fully associate myself with Russian. My dearest place is Algeria, and that's what I found out a year ago when I visited this country after more than 20 years of separation. And my hometown is still Moscow, and I really like the city. And it was my choice, and actually the first place where I could build something I called Home Sweet Home. And even though I repeat the same scenario from my childhood again and again, my deepest connections are not with my parents, but with other people who I met by chance. And those people are more than just pieces of puzzle I needed to fill into my scenario. So I asked, what could combine all the models, all the situations into one, and came up with the schema I think you've already noticed. So let me show you. There are 4 positions, 3 of which we'll discuss now, and the 4th, the soul position, I will describe in the last part of this video. I decided that one certain thing that could unite everything was the state of being active or passive. For example, when we have a trigger in the external world, one part of us moves to I active position. But when the trigger changes, the position of that part changes. However, I don't like behaviorism that much to claim that we're just a mechanism of reacting to the external world. On the contrary, I will say that we're looking for our lovely triggers to repeat our beloved scenarios. But right now, it's not so essential. What's important is that a part of a person can be either active or passive. I divided the passive position into two possible positions. It's individual and collective. I did it based on Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, or remembering that the inner space is already full of information. And of course, I didn't forget about the family trauma history. By that, I mean some patterns that were given from one generation to another in one family. And last, I didn't forget about the country or nation trauma history, thanks to Berne. But I consider this factor less important than the family history. I would also say that actually the nation or country trauma history is a background of the whole gestalt where you, as an individual, are a figure. But let's go back to our schema. So, the collective is about the inner space, the family, and the country or nation trauma history, or just history, as you like. And the individual is about a single person life. Also, this schema represents that each individual with his soul exists between the inner space and the matter space. That was the second ansatz, remember? I thought that there should be some kind of point of contact. In the matter space, it must be the body, while in the inner space, there is, as I call it, eye-to-eye contact. Now, it's not essential what it is. We'll return to this later. What's important now is that there are 2 points of contact for each individual. And now, let me entertain you a little bit while explaining the differences between I-passive collective and I-passive individual. I'll tell you some stories about my 2 inner parts. But before that, I need you to understand that this division is quite nominal. Okay? Let's start now. The first part I call my shadow friend, and the second will be the familial. I like full naming. So, a short recap. The first one is a male character, while the second is like a collective it. Both are about the protection from the external world. And at the beginning, the first one, the shadow friend, the red dot here, was more individual, while the familial, the yellow dot, was more collective. The first story will be about the shadow friend. There were dark times in Algeria when I was born, the Civil War. I lived on the close territory of the embassy, with not so many kids to play, and with emotionally absent parents. Hopefully, there was a guy from a military, and we got along together. This friendly and secure enough for me fellow with cool black mustache became a prototype for this inner part. The someone who can handle dark times instead of the inner girl. Because, she deserves to be happy the way she is, playing, chatting, and creating as much as she wants. So the sport, the shadow friend, started to appear in situations when I was in a lost position or when I had already lost something precious. For example, in my childhood in Mauritania, I lost my beloved little turtle because of one woman who stepped on it. I think she did it on purpose while heading to me and her son being in a fight. After the animal's death, and due to other circumstances, this inner part started to take more functions connected with grief and some bad emotions like anger after loose situations. But once he got involved with love, my first and second and maybe every deep connections, or I would rather say affections, were not about happy ending. And I knew it from the beginning. Well, some psychologists would say no wonder. So I had a loose situation from the beginning. And you may guess what scenario I and this inner part learned by heart. And love became something from a shadow. And so the friend represented something shady. He was really protective about the inner girl when I fell in love with my therapist, and he was the one against it. No wonder, cause it was a lost situation from the beginning, cause I already got my first no for my proposal, his lovely trigger. I want you to remind that I'm talking about myself, okay? And it's about my inner conflict, just in case. Sorry to interrupt. So he was trying to say something like, it's disgusting. I warn you, not to take any further step. We had bad experience, you know. And yes, I knew. But I said, it was bad. Yes, I know. But why don't we try to explore this feeling? It's really safe in her presence. Why not? And you know what? When you try to convince someone, especially yourself, this is something that's not working. I mean, the logical rationalism and not listening to the deep emotions. I mean, deep fears. So, my next step on behalf of this part was threatening myself with localized pain in my right leg to prevent myself from the further step. And I really hated it. How can he do this to me? And he shut up. But what not really working is anger and ignoring. So actually, he just switched off all the emotions. And it was really strange because, you know, a second ago I was like, oh, flattering and even lovey-dovey. And the next second I felt nothing. Zero. And that's when I finally said, okay, let's talk. And dived in trance. It was hard hearing him out, but it was worth it. Seeing him, even literally, because, you know, visualization is a really good technique in these cases, maybe in every case, because you can not just see but transform or do something with this visualization. I saw all his stages of growing up like me and felt all his emotions, especially pain and fear. And I could finally integrate him as not just a part of me, but as myself. So from that point, he became something that I can manage, and not just a part that can go there or do that because he thinks it's safer, but I can decide on my own. And this is how integration actually works in psychology. The second story will be shorter, but before that, I want to say a few words about psychosomatic illnesses. I like the idea, but you know, sometimes your head is aching because of the air pressure changes, or your neck nerves are screaming in an agony because the sun is trying to kill you with a magnetic storm. Okay, I'm done. Let's continue. So, the familial. The history of my family and the country they lived is quite complicated. let me just list a few historical events uh, in the last century. So it was the revolution. I mean, that one, you know that guy. When a part of my family was really enthusiastic and the other had to run away from Moscow just to survive. After that, there was collectivization, when first the whole person life started to be organized by a country, and second, it was the time of competitions in everything, in work, in economy, in politics, because the country needed to build up the whole economy and to gain the respect from the external world. And after that, there was the Second World War. Well, by the way, it was my grandparents' generation, not so long ago, actually. And from both sides, there were someone who died in this war. After the war, it was the country recovery period. It was a suffering time. And after this, it was the Cold War, about a competition again. And finally, it was about dissolution, you know what I mean, of the USSR, and the economic crisis, and me. So what I want to say here is that 5 generations before me were about surviving. They always were living in a survival mode. Like, first you needed to survive in order to change the system. Then you needed to show yourself and your desire to help for the idea of communism. And then you needed to survive in the World War. And then the Cold War, well, it's pressure. And then you just needed to survive in capitalism. You're not used to it. And that what actually lead to the thing that there was no space for an individual, for his wishes, for his feelings. And nobody actually taught the next generation to overcome their feelings, to be okay with yourself, to feel what you want or you need. And well, it was okay for the bad periods, but it resulted in that, unspoken feeling of constant fear of the world. And the coping mechanism to be like anyone else, not being yourself, just not being, the black sheep. And I think there were even more pressure in the system the previous generations lived. And actually, I can see the really big difference between capitalism and communism in that way, because if we're talking about transnational companies, they are just about the same. You have to be a mechanism in the system and you have to fit and to like the idea of the company you're working for. Hopefully there is some place for creativity nowadays. But imagine the Soviet Union, where the whole life was planned, the whole your life, from the beginning, from the kindergarten, school, university, place you have to work after the university, place you will live. So it was also about some kind of helpless to live on your own. And that's what I got to. So the fear of the world, because it's a dangerous place, and some kind of feeling that I have to be like the others. So that was my part, the familial about. By the way, I have a question for you. Have you ever thought of your patterns from that perspective? Maybe it will be interesting for you to learn something about the history of the country your family lived in, or maybe some family changes. Because, I listed only the historical events, but there were some family tragedies that had like footstep on the whole family trauma. But it was always about being like others, not being yourself. Back to my part, my inner part. It was a really deep and unseen frustration connected with this part, because the instruments of this part were about not aggression or anger like with the shadow friend, but it was about pressure, under the pressure. But there were some psychosomatic illnesses, like I tick, and I hate it, really. I had it in my childhood when we moved back to Russia from Algeria. No wonder there was some tragic for me events connected with the family. So it repeated again, and of course I again dived in trance to see what it was about. There was an interesting visualization this time. It was something like No Face from Spirited Away by Hayao Miyazaki. And it was a really small figure, because it always been under the pressure and was so frightened and this part just wanted actually to protect myself from my own decisions to be myself. And what it actually did was also estimating my sessions with a therapist as nonsense, as something not important and even with no value at all. Because they already led to inner transformation and becoming my true self, of course. But my true self is really different from the others. And it was something terrifying. Because maybe the world wouldn't accept me. It can be, yes. So I just hugged this part and thanked for its effort to be by my side. And after that, my inner girl who was afraid of this part, because actually this part tried to taught a lesson, really tough one. She started to be more friendly with this part, and this part started to be more gentle. Yeah. So that was the second integration. I think you have figured out the differences between I passive collective and I passive individual. But I also think that you have noticed that each of my parts had some kind of injection of the other position. For the shadow friend, my parents' inability to be emotionally available that was presented by the previous generations was that kind of injection that made him more neutral, like on this schema. And moreover, I with my own hands authorized him to be both the shadow and the animus when I got acquainted with these Jung archetypes. Of course, the transformation didn't take so fast and in one step like on the schema. This is just the main idea of his path, okay? For the familial, the injection was a sequence of my own decisions to be silent when I needed myself the most. Also, I think you have noted that though both these parts were claimed to be about protection, by me in the recap, they were, besides that, about the communication with the external world and with the other inner parts, but I'm leaving these aside now. But I must add that I use these two words, communication and protection, in the most global meaning. What's the difference then? Well, it's the same soup, but reheated sometimes, literally. Like, the soup is okay to eat, but if you reheat it, you can actually burn your throat. Or you can think that you're this soup. Reheating will mean for you a defense, a point contact, or a point attack, but still it's a contact. And being neutral, or even called, is a point communication, but maybe a little bit friendly. Okay, I know this is an absurd example. Let me try again. I think that a really good illustration is two-handed sword. It's called two-handed because you need to use two hands. Sorry for lame jokes in this part. Okay, so this is a good example because both of your hands are occupied and all the movements are connected with this sword. But let me reverse this situation a little bit. Think of an attack as a point contact or a defense, a movement to get rid of your opponent from the territory, from your territory, from your comfort zone. And think of a defense movement as um, as an invitation to communicate closer, like maybe hit him with your head, but still in a point way. It can remind you of a wave, a defense, a communication, defense, communication, defense, communication. What I also like about this sword example is that it's a good illustration of how to measure if this protection or contact is okay with your whole self. You will lose your balance like me with this too heavy metal stick, or you won't. And there are some indications to help you to understand in which situation you are now. The emotions. Finally, they started to make sense. From this point of view, these annoying emotions manifested themselves as really good instruments I could use before reacting to the external world or the inner parts in a protective or communicative way. They showed me whether the situation was important or not important, and if it was essential, whether it was okay or not okay with the inner part they referred to. So, the intensity of an emotion in your or my coordinate system is about the importance, and the exact emotion is about being okay or not okay in its specific way. I would say in a how question. Adding some details, I stressed that the intensity was linked to your or my coordinate system, because everyone has his unique nervous system, and not forgetting about the clinical psychological cases. For example, for me it's okay to feel dizzy with great excitement, though I'm currently adjusting to being so sensitive. At the same time, I can turn the volume so down that I would barely feel anything, like a psychopath in some way, and I'm also okay with this coordinates. So do find your own 0 point for your coordinates, okay? Second, okay or not okay. So I figured out that for the familial, it was okay to be silent and to be like others, but it was absolutely not okay for my inner girl who wants to befriend the whole world, especially if she likes something or someone, and to enjoy the life in lots of its existences. And both of the parts have the right to feel the way they feel. And actually, I can't estimate who's better, or I can't even compare them because they exist in their own background and activate with their specific triggers. So the emotions are showing me how this or that part feels right now, and disclosing why this part in this position and what this part wants. And yes, I said I can't estimate who's better, but at the same time, I can decide if this situation is okay with my whole coordinate system, or I want to try something new by restructuring the exact part or the whole integration system. For example, I can give the part a thing it needs, like the feeling of security, or I can share one function, like overcoming grief, or like supporting each other with the other parts, not just with this one, in order not to overstimulate this exact part and to get more different tools how to react. Just a win-win situation, you know. So I can try actually anything, and in accordance with my idea of the inner balance, and estimate the result and the tool from the perspective of each inner part. And it turned out that it's like an endless game of exploring myself and this world, where both of us are changing with every choice, and the emotions were helpers. Okay, let's talk about love now. Saying beforehand, my falling in love was about the next. This person is extremely important to most of my inner parts in an okay way. And again, okay is about the habit, or actually about a gestalt, this certain sequence of factors as a background, and this certain sequence of actions or choices as a figure formed against this background. So it's like a comfortable and familiar conditions and variety of actions or choices for a certain inner part, or even the whole person. Hmm. Isn't it quite simple yet so elegant to determine love as an indicator of that someone or something is important in an appropriate way to the inner part. And let me add here, I'm talking about love as emotion, but not about love as a process of expressing yourself because you feel this feeling. Okay? Again, love as an indicator in this sentence. Yeah. Actually, this definition is not enough for the whole picture, but it was already enough to understand in which situation I was and to go forward. But I can add some spoilers. Being in love, I mean that process I mentioned is about making a choice one after another out of new yet so close to yours variety of possible behavior in order to form the whole gestalt or to fill your background with new information or to construct the figure. I mean, in some way, the inner part with more details. But I suppose this sentence is quite, well, not user-friendly and too long, and it's hard to process the information because, well, we need the third part about Gestalt. So that's why we're moving back to the individual matrix. That was the second certain thing that could unite everything, the state of being protective or communicative toward the external world. So I created a more complex schema. Ready? Now we have two additional pointers coming from the I passive position. It's the communicative or protective state. And actually we have two more qualifications, and I'd like to start with the point contact issue. I thought it would be fairer to make 2 points of contact in the matter space, the body and I active. But what actually is I active, you would ask? And the answer will be brain. But the brain is bigger than I active. In fact, the brain is an instrument that could be illustrated as a pyramid, like on this schema that contains I active and 4 other points on the protective communicative pointers. The brain is a part of the body space, or you can just say the body, but actually I made up this term in order not to confuse the brain and the body without a brain. Sounds stupid. And to show that their functions are a little bit different. So for the body, it's about being between the brain and the external world in order to gather information in different ways and to act in different ways, more ways than brain, can afford himself just sitting in the skull. Helpless brain. And the brain itself is about forming and changing structures of the gathered information. And of course, the body space is a part of the matter space, but I think it's logical. So, in the matter space, each individual has two point of contacts, and they are the brain and the body. I active is something like a tool or an abstract place or an abstract point where you're making one choice or decision out of endless possibilities. And that was actually a spoiler, because back then my hands didn't reach the studies on brain, and well, yeah. Of course, I'll tell you more about it, dreams, trance, the soul space, but in the last part of the video. Though I think you already hate me for making so much promises. But let's move back to the second clarification. Look, you can see only the conscious. Where is the unconscious, the base part of human psyche since Freud's discoveries or even earlier? In my first drafts, I had it. But then I thought, do I really need it? Now that I'm taking more and more responsibility for my parts, which I mean seeing them, hearing them out, taking their needs into account, and of course training my awareness, so that far I'm going to take the whole responsibility for my soul, which I am not quite sure is what, but still, do I really need the unconscious? That was the moral side of the question, and I had no reason to dismiss this part of human psyche until I saw something. So, every inner part is quite stable and activates when it finds its beloved trigger, right? By the way, the trigger might be a background, a familiar situation, I mean, like for the shadow friend, it was a lost situation, or another figure, like for the familial, it was my therapist as a supportive figure, and well, there we had also the background of minor parts of the transformation. So this is something that is clear for us now, right? And here goes the insight. Acting on behalf of any inner part is acting on behalf of the figure, a certain figure, with a certain background, which results in a whole, a certain situation with a certain meaning, and actually that is not just a combination of its parts, it's more than a combination. It's not just 1 plus 1 equals 2, but 1 plus 1 equals 3. And that all means that each of us is acting like a gestalt. Let me illustrate it. The shadow friend. His background is a lost situation when he can count only on himself in order to regain or even build from the start a secure outer world with prospects of the inner girl playing cheerfully and safe. So he activates in the external world when I lose something or someone really important, so he can take the grief and overcome it because he's a tough guy. Or when I find myself in a situation really different from the previous one, so he can explore the lands, take the risk, and make the first step to fit in. I hope now this big sentence is more clear. So again, each of us, each individual is acting as an endless sequence of gestalts. And it's so wonderful and, so simply great because it means that we're not just the tons of random facts with practically no logic at all, but each of us is a particular set of gestalts that can be easily explored and understood. And moreover, each structure, each gestalt, is filled with a really unique set of information. Yeah. That was something that gave me the permission to dismiss the unconscious forever. Why? Because you're always aware of a little thing of your inner gestalt. At least a figure or at least a choice you're making, the act. So, knowing this thing means knowing that this gestalt exists. And of course, you may say that maybe you haven't found yourself in a situation where a really shady and small gestalt activates and you just don't know about it. And I can agree with you here. But I would say that it's a really low possibility because, I have the reason to say so, but we need the string and theory before that. Sorry. Don't eat my things. I say no. Well, instead of the unconscious, I suggest to use the levels of awareness of this or that in your part. And of course, these levels are nominal, and individual, I mean in accordance with your coordinate system, like everything I suggest here, actually. But I meant that you can't fully be aware or unaware of the gestalt. Yeah, you can't. Okay, done with it. We now only have the conscience full of gestalts of different complexity. And with the help of the intuition and visualization, I divided all inner parts into 3 categories, though you may see 4 of them. The first one is gestalt and act, the second image, and the last one is subpersona. The difference between a gestalt and an act is that an act is a choice making, which is changing the gestalt, or an image, or a subpersona, or a figure in the gestalt, or a background in it. It's something like moving. I mean, changing the coordinates of your hand, for example. Here it goes. Yeah. A subpersona is something really big, the biggest part of you. To illustrate, when I went to Algeria in 2022, I discovered my third subpersona, the inner girl. And of course, she had some certain characteristics. For example, she was the one highly sensitive, and it's a really big function. Her language was French, and it's another function. She was really enthusiastic, exploring everything, another function, and of course, with the help of visualization, I saw her as a child, a girl. So it's a 3D model. You see, a really big and most important, diversified thing. An image is something between the subpersona and the gestalt. For example, a language, or an archetype, or a supportive figure for you, a teacher, a grandparent, or a therapist. It's something functional. In fact, I would say it has only one function. And it's something that contains more simple and homogeneous components. You may argue with me saying that the language feels like hell when you start learning it, and it's like exploring a subpersona, and I can agree with you really. But saying in advance, a subpersona and an image can be transformed into a gestalt, a subpersona into an image and a gestalt into a figure or even a background. And it all depends only on your focus and on the whole picture size, whether it's small or big, and the coordinate systems that can be easily changed. And I'm going to show you this trick really soon. But before that, let's finally determine the conscience. So the conscience is a complex of soul's functions to combine into different structures or gestalts, individual or collective information that is gathered through a choice made with the help of the brain or any other point in the mental space that is connected with this particular soul. Ta-da! The second conclusion. Let's claim in advance that an individual is a certain soul and its representation in the matter space, the body, that contains different yet connected parts. These parts may have three characteristics. The first one, being active or passive towards the external world. The second one, being created from the information gathered through the individual's experience or the collective experience that contains the inner space information, the country and nation history, and the family history. And a third one is while being active towards the external world, it may be communicative, which means acting in the individual's comfort zone, or being protective, which means acting in the zone of new possibilities and new choices. The emotions are the indicators of how this or that inner part feels right now. Is it this situation okay or not okay? Where okay is about a habit, a familiar situation. And the intensity of the emotion in each individual's coordinate system is about the importance of the situation. Acting on behalf of any inner part means acting as a gestalt, as a figure against the background. So any inner part is actually a structural particle that you can divide into different facts, but they would be meaningless separately. There is no need in the unconscious, cause the individual acts as unstoppable sequence of gestalts, which means that he is aware or at least know that the gestalt exists by knowing just that this little thing, this part of gestalt exists. Instead of the unconscious, I suggest to use the levels of the awareness of this or that part in each individual's coordinate system. And of course, again, each inner part is a gestalt of different complexity. And there are three categories of gestalts, but still each of it is a gestalt, a figure against the background. And finally, let's talk about it.